Okay, all good? Excellent. Hey, Victor. You can be on the camera until Mummy comes and gets you. Okay, so we are in the book of James. So we're doing a series on James and Galatians, and we're going to be looking at them back to back. And so we've done the overview of the two of them together, and now we're going through James. We've looked at the first part of the prologue of James. We got to verse 8. Today we're going to do a more sizable chunk, and it's actually quite relevant to doing communion on a day like this. In fact, I find that James chapter 2 and Galatians chapter 2 are both extremely relevant to the theme of the ordinances of the Lord's Supper and of foot washing. So I want to go through that under this idea. So we're looking from verse, last week, 2 weeks ago when we were in James, we were looking at the idea that trials, there's going to be, count it joy when there's trials. This is one of the themes here. Count it joy when there's trials. Who feels joyful when there's trials? It's pretty difficult, isn't it? So you're supposed to count it. You're supposed to make note of this, that trials are coming. We looked at the fact that if you lack wisdom, and some of that wisdom is to see the joy in the trials, let him ask God, who gives liberally. God is presented in James as the giver, as this liberal giver. He gives liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him. Let him ask in faith, and we've got this idea about faith, asking knowing that it's going to happen rather than asking in doubt, because doubt makes you double-minded. So we're now at this point, and we're going to start to look at this other theme that's going to come into James, this theme about how we treat one another. Okay, we've looked at the idea of where faith comes from and where trials come from. What we're supposed to do in the midst of trials. So look in verse 9. We're going to pick up from there. Let the lowly brother glory. Chapter 1, James chapter 1. In verse 9, let the lowly brother glory in his exaltation, but let the rich glory in his humiliation, because as a flower of the field he will pass away. Now, it's interesting here, the lowly is called a brother, and the rich is not. Okay, but it could be. I mean, it doesn't need to be, but Jesus, and this is something that I will hand out in a couple of weeks' time when we get through a little bit more, but James is very, very much mimicking a lot of the Sermon on the Mount in his letter. So when we look at lowly, has anyone else got something different instead of lowly in verse 9? Humble. It could even be the word poor in some Bibles. So let the lowly or the poor glory in his exaltation. So God is going to exalt and lift up the poor or the lowly or the humble. And so we're starting to see this theme of poor and rich, because I mean lowly is contrasted there with rich, isn't it? Lowly and rich. And so does Jesus have anything to say about the poor in the Sermon on the Mount? Blessed are the poor in spirit. In fact, if you go to Luke's Sermon on the Plain, okay, because Jesus has a Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5. It's quite, it makes sense that he'd probably have preached that several times throughout his career as a minister. Luke talks about a Sermon on the Plain, and he gives very similar points there, but Luke doesn't have poor in spirit. Luke has blessed are the poor. Just blessed are the poor. Okay? It's not just poor in spirit, but poor as well. Blessed are the poor. And here we've got the poor are going to be exalted. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And it says, for no sooner has the sun risen with a burning heat than it withers. And this is talking about the flower in the field, which the rich is likened to. The flower falls and its beautiful appearance perishes. So the rich man will fade away in his pursuits. Now, that doesn't mean there can't be a rich brother. Okay? But what it means is that the rich brother won't consider his identity to be found in what? In those things that will fade away, in his riches. Now, we could put anything else here. I want to think of it in how might the Jews consider themselves as opposed to the Gentiles? in James's day, remember this is within a decade or so of Jesus dying. What might the Jews have considered themselves? Sorry?
So much better.
Rich. They might have considered themselves rich.
Yeah, wealthy.
Yeah, and the Gentile would be then the poor. What might a person who is handsome versus someone who is not so? Jesus didn't have anything to attract. Isaiah 53 tells us that. There was nothing comely about him in the sense that, people would be drawn to him on outward appearance. They were drawn to him because of his character. So we could supplement that with any class distinction. Rich, poor, we could do Gentile, Jew, any of the classes that we divide ourselves in as humanity. Jesus is saying that God is the great what? The great equalizer. He's exalting and let them glory in their exaltation as a poor person. Why? How is a poor person exalted? What makes a poor person exalted? How are they exalted? If you're poor, let's say you're a homeless person as opposed to someone who is like Elon Musk, what's the access that you have to the kingdom? The exact same. So the poor person is exalted in that scenario, and Elon Musk is, someone like that, is humbled to the point where he's having to ask Jesus to do something that he can't do for himself with all his riches. So let the poor person glory in their exaltation, but the rich glory in their humiliation, because we both are coming through equal access, an equal pathway. God is the great equalizer, and salvation is the greatest message because it's freely accessible to all. Then it says in verse 12, blessed is the man who endures temptation. Now, this word temptation is the same word as used in verse 2, count it all joy when you fall into various trials. It's actually the word, blessed is the man who endures trials, temptations, tests. It's the same word that can be meaning all of those things. For when he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life. So he's returning to this theme of when you get tested, when you get tempted, when you get tried. You're blessed. You're actually blessed when you go that. But there's a possible misunderstanding here, because he says, let no one say when he's tempted or tried or tested that I am tempted or tried or tested by God. So he's saying it's great when you get tested, but just don't misunderstand me, that those don't come from God. Tests don't come from God. Trials don't come from God. Where do they come from? Well, we're going to see. What did you say? Satan. Well, that's not the answer we actually get here in the text. Okay? We get a different answer. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. But each is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed. Does anyone have a King James? What does it say instead of desire? Lust. When he's drawn away by his own lust. Now we, in our 21st century mindset, we use the word lust for only one category of vice, don't we? One category of sin. It's a sexual sin. But the word lust in King James English would mean all unnatural and even natural desires. Do we all have a yearning? Do we all have wants? Yeah. So when he's drawn away by his own wants, now, is temptation bad? No. Is wanting bad? Okay, it's very important for us to make this clarification. If you're tempted, was Jesus tempted? Yes. But he didn't sin. So temptation itself is not sin. Lust itself is not sin. But when you're drawn away by it, that's what's the problem here in this text here. So I actually, as I read this, I think of a specific story in the scriptures where there was a temptation, where someone was drawn away by their own lust. Sorry? David? No, I'm thinking of just the first one. Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve. I actually think this is in the back of James's mind when he's thinking here, because there's a progression. If you go to the Adam and Eve story, Eve is there, and she has questions, she has desires. Was it wrong for her to have questions? No, it wasn't. It was wrong for her to be drawn away by them and not go to God with them. And so when she was drawn away, it became sin. It became sin. She took her eyes off God, and her wanting was always fulfilled when her eyes were on God. Our wanting, has anyone heard the term God-shaped vacuum? We all have a God-shaped vacuum in us, She didn't, because she was always turned to God, but when she took her eyes away from God, then there was a vacuum. And so when she allowed something other than God to fill that vacuum, that's what sin is. Sin is filling the hole inside of ourselves with other than that which is supposed to fill it. That's a different way of looking at sin, isn't it? We often think of sin as doing something. Well, actually, sin that's not the primary idea of sin. Sin as a state of being is this yearning and filling ourselves with other than what fills us, what was made to fill us. It's like putting diesel into a petrol engine. Okay, it's not going to work very well. That's sin. Sin is about what breaks us down when we put the wrong thing into our system. And so we see a progression. Temptation comes because lust leads to being drawn away. And when desire has conceived in this way, it gives birth to sin. And this is interesting that he's using the birth analogy. And sin, when it is fully grown, brings death. So we see that in Adam and Eve. They had the lust that led to a sin. It gave birth to sin. And that eventually grew up to death. In the day that you eat it, you shall surely die. Now, Adam lived for 930 years. At least most of that was when he was a sinner. And he eventually died. But the death started when he did it, when he took that, didn't it? It was the beginning of death. And so we see this progression. And we've seen a similar progression earlier in James, where it says, in verse 2, we saw this last time, count it all joy when you fall into various trials. So trials are the beginning of both of these progressions. But in the one sense, the trial leads you to be lusting, going to sin, and going to death. In this one, count it all joy when you fall into trials, knowing that this is the opposite progression. The testing of your faith produces patience. Patience, when it has its perfect work, will leave you perfect and complete, lacking nothing. So that's the two contrasts we see. We see one which leads to death and one which leads to being perfect and lacking nothing. And then we get this beautiful picture of who God is. Do not be deceived, my beloved brethren. Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above and comes down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow of turning.
Where are you reading that?
This is verse 16, 17 and 18. Of his own will, he brought us forth. So we've got the birth imagery. He's brought us forth by the word of truth, that we might be a kind of first fruits of his creatures. So we've seen that lust can give birth to sin. But God, our perfect Father, has brought us forth by the word of truth, that we might become a first fruits of his creatures. He's the good Father. That's why we sang that one. He's the good Father who gives every perfect gift. And we've seen some of these perfect gifts in this chapter. He gives us what when we ask with faith? Wisdom. If we ask wisdom, lacking any doubt, just with perfect faith, he's going to give it to us. What else does it say he's going to give us? He's going to give us a crown of life. He's going to give us the patience that comes through faith. He gives us all the perfect gifts. We're going to see some more perfect gifts that he's going to give as well. And he's going to leave us perfect and complete. And remember, that word perfect is complete. What he gives us, everything he gives us is complete. He doesn't give us partially. He doesn't give us in part. He gives us the whole thing. Do we have all of heaven at our fingertips right now? Do we have to wait? No, we've got it all accessible right here and right now, because Jesus has opened he's taken the keys of death and Hades. We just have to believe. And it says he's the Father of lights. He's the Father of lights. What is light in and of itself? Does anyone know? Got any scientists here? What is light? I mean, it's
of darkness.
Sorry?
It's the absence of darkness.
No, darkness is the absence of light.
Illumination.
Sorry?
Illumination.
Light, in a physical sense, they're still debated whether it's a wave or it's a particle. It's actually a bit of both. It's substance, though. We do know that it's substance. It moves. Light moves. And so God is substance. Sin is not actually a thing. Did you know that? Sin is the absence of a thing. If you think of it, lust is the absence of something. Sin is the absence of something. Death is the absence of something. We often get caught up in a dualism that the world is all in favor of, like that there's evil is equal to good. Like that's the dualistic mindset, that evil is an opposing force. No, it's an absence. Evil is just an absence. It doesn't actually exist. It's the absence of existence. What is doubt? Is doubt a thing? Doubt is the absence of faith. What is despair? It's the absence of hope. What is the absence of love? Fear. Absolutely. Absolutely, fear is the absence of love. A lot of people think it's hate. Hate is the opposite. Hate is actually passionate. Is hate a good thing? Can be. God hates sin. We should hate sin. Hate is not a terrible thing if it's channeled in the right way. Love can be channeled in the wrong way as well, can't it? And then it becomes lust or infatuation. But fear is the absence of love. That's why perfect love casts out fear. There is no fear in love. Perfect love casts out fear. We have not been given a spirit of fear, but of love, power, and a sound mind. So love is the substance and fear is the actual absence. Lust, what is the absence of? It's another 4-letter word. Rest. Resting in him. Resting in him. If you're resting in him, then you don't have that sense of lust, that sense of desire and needing something. And so God is called the Father of lights. He's the Father of all the good things, all the substance that is in the world. And there's no shadow. There's not even a tiny bit of shadow in him. So this takes us back again to Genesis with, God created light. There's another, we're comparing James and Galatians, but you could compare James and John, 1 John, as letters, because 1 John talks about this a lot. God is light, and in him there is no darkness at all. Here we're seeing that there's no variation, there's no shadow, not even the shadow of a darkness. God is the full substance. And of his will, he wants, his desire, this is God's desire, is to bring us forth by the word of truth, to be a first fruits of his creatures. Now we think of first fruits being, the first of the fruit, but first fruits is often the cream of the crop, the creme de la creme. It's the best fruits. He wants us to be the best fruits, not first in time, but first in glory. He wants us to be first in glory. We are the lights that he is the Father of. We are the lights. He's the Father of lights. We're to be the lights. And so I just love that imagery there, and we're moving forward, we're progressing forward. It's going to all come together, and it's going to be very relevant to why we're seated in a circle here, because he's coming to a point here. So then, my beloved brethren, and I love how he keeps on calling them brothers. He keeps calling them brothers because he's trying to show the equalizing that is supposed to be a part of the Christian faith and a part of who we are when we commune together, when we congregate together. Let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath, for the wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God. So is he saying don't ever have wrath? Does he say never be angry? No, it's just be slow to be angry. And it says, but he starts off and he says, be swift to hear. What are we supposed to hear? What is it that we are supposed to hear?
The word of God.
The word that we are brought forth by the word of truth. Now I'm going to come and I'm going to do something interesting in a second. So I just want you to note the first thing that we are to do with regards to the word is hear. Okay, we're supposed to hear it. Let's keep going in verse 21. Therefore lay aside all filthiness and overflow of wickedness, and receive with meekness the implanted word. What's the next verb that we're supposed to be doing with the word?
Save your souls.
Sorry?
Saving souls, it says.
Which is able to save your souls, yes. But what are we supposed to do with the word?
Accept it.
Receive it. So the first one is hear it. The second step is to receive it. You could even say implant it as well, because it's the implanted word. That's the description. It's the implanted word. And then it says, be doers of the word. What are we now supposed to do? Do the word.
Yeah.
Okay? So then be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man observing his natural face in a mirror. For he observes himself, goes away, and immediately forgets what kind of man he was. But he who looks into the perfect law of liberty and continues in it, is not a forgetful hearer, but a doer of the work, this one will be blessed by what he does. What word are we now supposed to do? There in verse 25. We hear, we receive, we do, and in verse 25 it says we continue in it. Okay? These are 4 steps. 4 steps. Now, I want to think of a parable of Jesus. The parable of the sower. Okay? Those who were represented by the seed, remember the seed is the word of God. The seed fell on the path. They were those who heard the word only. They just heard it, but they didn't receive it. And so the birds would come in and just eat the seed, take it away, snatch it away from them. But then those who were on the rocky ground, they heard it and received it, but they didn't receive it deep. They didn't receive it deep into them. And so what happened? Well, they didn't have deep roots. When the sun shone, they just withered up. And then the next one was those who were among the weeds. They were implanted. They were the ones who were implanted properly, but they got choked out. And the good soil would be those who hear, receive, have it implanted, do, and continue. And not forget. So these are we can overlay this with a parable of the sower. And we also see that progression. But I like that there's a couple of things here. First of all, there's an interplay between word and law. So the law, remember the Torah, that's the word that they had. This is James. He's writing probably the first document that we have in our New Testament. So when he's talking about the word, he's talking about everything that went beforehand. That includes the Old Testament. That was their scripture. We're blessed to have the New Testament as well, but they didn't have it. He was writing it. He was just starting it. So Mark and James and Galatians, they were the first books that were written. And he's just starting it. So when he's talking about the receiving the word, it's what Jesus said in his life, which referred back to the Old Testament, which prophesied him. So he's saying, but he who looks into the perfect law of liberty. Now, Jesus said that, James is saying that God is the giver of every good and what gift? Perfect gift. And now we're hearing that the law is the perfect law of liberty. Isn't that one of the gifts that God has given us? The law is a gift. It's one of the gifts. And but it's not there to save us. We're saved not by that. We're saved by him, by what he does in us. The law there is a mirror to show us that we need him. It shows us that we need him. But I want to do something interesting. Let's go back to verse 19 and read it this way. Who is the word? Jesus. Jesus, and this is the word logos in the Greek, and Jesus is called the logos. So if we have a look at the logos, it's, so then, my brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath, for the wrath of God does not produce the righteousness of wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God. Therefore, it was verse 18. Of his own will he brought us forth by Jesus, by the word of truth. Jesus is the word and Jesus is truth, isn't he? He brought us forth by Jesus that we might be a kind of first fruits of his creatures. Come down to 21. Therefore lay aside any filthiness and overflow of wickedness, and receive with meekness the implanted Jesus, which is able to save your souls. But be doers of Jesus, and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. For if anyone is a hearer of Jesus, and not a doer, he is like a man observing his natural face in a mirror. For he observes himself, goes away, and immediately forgets what kind of man he was. But he who looks into the perfect Jesus of liberty, remember law is a synonym for word here, Jesus of liberty, and continues in him, and is not a forgetful hearer, but a doer of the work, this one will be blessed by what he does. Isn't it interesting when you just read it and put it that way? You know, it's Jesus that is being spoken of here, and I'll show it in a moment. Some people consider, some scholars, critical scholars, they consider James to have a very, what's called a low Christology. Okay, a low Christology means, well, he wrote so early, they hadn't really formed their idea that Jesus is God. And that's not true, because we saw at the very beginning, he puts God and Jesus on an equal footing. He says, James, a bondservant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ. They've been made equal right in the first verse of James. But we're going to see how he does it again. So let's come down to verse 26, and this is going to be another gripe. I'm going to deal with a few of the gripes. In fact, James allows you to do that because James is a wisdom book. It's like Proverbs. He's got punchy one-liners. That's why a lot of them, you've probably heard these verses before, because they're one-liners, they're good memory verses. So who has heard Christians claim, well, I'm not religious, I'm against religion, I'm only in favour of Christianity, or religion is bad. It's become a popular thing because religion is hated by people out in the world, and so Christians get on the bandwagon and say, well, yes, religion is terrible, but true Christianity, etc. No, bad religion is bad, good religion is good, and we're going to see that right here. If anyone among you thinks himself to be religious and does not bridle his tongue, we'll get to that in chapter 3 in a couple of weeks, but does not bridle his tongue but deceives his own heart, this one's religion is worthless. So there's a bad religion here in verse 26. But 27 tells us something else. But pure and undefiled religion before God and the Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their trouble and to keep oneself unspotted from the world. It just grates me when people say, I hate religion too. Now, I know what they're doing. They're saying, well, I hate what you call religion. But we should make that very clear. I'm 99.99999% atheist. I'm 99.99999% atheist because I don't believe in the God that a lot of people don't believe in. All of the images that people have as God when they close their eyes and say, I don't believe in God. Well, I don't believe in your God either because, if I was to close my eyes and picture what you consider God, he's not the God that I have. So I don't believe in your God. I'm 99, because I'm 0.00001% theist. I believe in the one true God of the Bible. And so I'm also anti-religion, 99.99999%. I'm only in favour of true religion. Every single human is religious. You can't be a-religious. All people believe and have faith in something. There's no absence of religion. There's good religion and there's bad religion. And so what we're hearing here is the contrast between a pure religion which goes out and looks for the unfortunate and underprivileged in society and seeks to lift them up. Here it's orphans and widows. That was the worst class that you could be in because you were basically a beggar in that day and age. I mean, Isaiah chapter 1, they were neglecting the orphans and the widows, and God was saying, I hate your feast days, I hate your Sabbaths, I hate everything that you're doing, don't bring me sacrifices, because everything that you're neglecting is in terms of your social ethics of lifting people up. You're neglecting that, so all of the other stuff is just disgusting to me. I just want to vomit it out. Don't come to me because I just want to vomit everything that you're doing because you're not living it. You're not living a true religion. So we want to be 0.00001% theist, and we want to be 0.00001% religious in terms of pure religion, the narrow way. And he starts to come back to what he started this with, which is the difference between a lowly and a rich person. Now he's going to put it into a practical context here. My brethren, do not hold the faith of our Lord Jesus Christ. I mean, you can't say this is a low Christology. He's calling him the Lord Jesus Christ. Okay? He basically, in Hebrew sense, he's calling him Yahweh. Yahweh Yeshua. Messiah. The Lord of glory. Now, here, see that? Lord of glory. Do you know what he's calling Jesus right here? He's saying this. Now, this is a guy who grew up with Jesus for his whole life. Jesus was his actual biological brother. We looked at that a couple of weeks ago. This is not just someone who met him for 3.5 years. This is someone who was around him for the whole time and had the whole, why can't you be more like your brother Jesus? And Jesus never got that. Why can't you be more like James? It was always the other way. So this is a guy who grew up with that sense of resentment. He's always perfect because he's perfect. He's God. And he's saying that he's recognizing the person he grew up with is the Lord of glory. Now, if you were in a Hebrew sense, now, if you've got a New King James, it's the Lord is in italics there. But it makes sense syntactically. In the syntax here, it's the Lord Jesus Christ of glory is the Greek. But it's really the Lord Jesus Christ, and then you can take that Lord and put it over here again with Lord of glory. So that's why they've done it. It's actually accurate. You're actually saying this person that I grew up with was the Shekinah glory. He's the guy who Moses went to meet. He's actually identifying Jesus as the Shekinah that was in the temple. Now, come back over. God the Father is called the Father of lights. Glory is light. Okay, the Shekinah was. So he's actually saying this is the Son of the Father of lights. This is the Son. He's the Lord of glory, and if the Father is the Father of glory, then Jesus is the Son of God. That's what it's saying here. So it's actually a high Christology. It's just, he doesn't have to spell it out because he's just speaking as normal to his people. And so he's, with all of this context that he's given, which is that God is the great equalizer, everyone is equally able to be accessing salvation, we come to this ethic of how to treat one another when there's differences. If there should come into your assembly a man with golden rings in fine apparel, and there should also come in a poor man in filthy clothes, and you'll pay attention to the one wearing the fine clothes, and to the one wearing the fine clothes you say, sit here in a good place, and say to the poor man, you should stand over there, or sit here at my footstool. What you've done is you've shown partiality. You've shown partiality among yourselves and become judges with evil thoughts. Ooh, that one really, has anyone ever judged someone because of any outwardness? I do it. I have to stop myself, and I still do it. But what he's saying here is that if you do that, come and follow the progression. He's saying God has given to you perfect gifts. He's given to you total gifts. Remember that word perfect? It means complete. Why are you taking the complete gifts God has given you and breaking them up into pieces? And some to you, some to you. He's saying, no, God's given you perfect gifts. Why are you being partial when God is not partial? God is whole. God is complete. And you're taking everything God is giving in terms of which is complete. There's nothing lacking, no lack. And you're breaking it up and giving a bigger piece here and a smaller piece there. That is evil. Now remember, evil is the absence of good. It's the absence of God. You're actually acting in a way where you've thrown God out. You've thrown God out by being partial. And that's why we're sitting in a circle here, so that there is no head and there is no footstool. This is an object lesson. I just wanted to do it as a feast like this to show we're all equal. It's a round table. It's like King Arthur, the Knights of the Round Table. That story is because he didn't want there to be a head. They're all equals as knights. We are all soldiers that are equal. And so that's why I laid this out. We're going to do a different object lesson when we get to Galatians 2 and do communion. It's going to be a different layout. So come and see what I'm going to do for that. But here, the point he's making is Now we could substitute someone with fine apparel and someone with rags, and by rags it means that person's a beggar. They didn't have anything. In fact, in the Roman times, there were places you could go and even hire golden rings, rent them out to go to a party to make yourselves look good. Nothing's changed. 2,000 years later, nothing's changed. People still go and hire a nice expensive car or suit to make themselves look showy, and because we tend to do that, don't we? We tend to see someone walk in that looks like that. We don't want to be neglecting anyone. Everyone should have equal favour. In fact, in God's way, the person who is lower needs to be lifted up. Pure religion, go and find those who need to be lifted up. If you're going to give any more attention to someone, give it to the person who doesn't have. And so he says, listen, my beloved brethren, he keeps calling them brothers and sisters, my beloved brethren, has God not chosen the poor of this world to be rich in faith and heirs of the kingdom? So he's bringing it all together. They're fellow heirs. They're supposed to be in with us. They're princes. I mean, they're princes. If you're a child of God, you're a prince or a princess. There's no two ways about that. child of a king is a prince or a princess. Doesn't matter what they look like here. But you have dishonored the poor man. Do not the rich oppress you and drag you into courts? Now, he's not talking about the rich brother. He's talking about the rich in general. Don't people who... If having riches made you in some way more deserving of attention, then it would be the same with all the rich people. In the Hebrew mindset, if you're rich, you're blessed and God is with you. But aren't the rich the type of people who take you to court? They try to dispossess you of what you have, and they try to increase their own empire at the expense of others. And he's saying, do they not blaspheme that noble name by which you are called? If you really fulfill the royal law, and he's coming back to this idea of law, the word, if you fulfill the royal law according to the scriptures, you shall love your neighbour as yourself. Now that's the summary of the law. You know, we've got the love God with all your heart and love your neighbour as yourself. He's saying you would do this. Now, who's your neighbour? Jesus told us that. Jesus told us it's the person who needs. That's the point of the Good Samaritan's parable. Who was that person's neighbour? It was the one who helped him. They were, in fact, the Jew, the Levite, the priest, they were all close akin, but they weren't his neighbour because they didn't see him as someone who needed help. But if you show partiality, you commit sin and are convicted by the law as transgressors. For whoever shall keep the whole law and stumble in one point, he is guilty of all. And he tells us what that law is. He goes into a bit more detail. He who said, do not commit adultery, also said, do not murder. Now, if you do not commit adultery, but you murder, you have become a transgressor of the law. So speak and do as those who will be judged by the law of liberty. And again calls it the law of liberty. It's not a law of oppression, it's a law of freedom. I actually don't like calling it the law, I call it the boundaries. All right? It's the boundaries because they're boundaries for right relationships. The first 4 commandments tell us how to have right relationship with God. The second table, the 6 commandments tell us how to have right relationships with each other. You're safest sheep are safest in a closed environment. They have freedom, liberty to eat everything within there, but outside of that there's wolves. Outside of that there's dangers. That's the same way with the law. It's not something to oppress us. It's something that tells us you're safe within this environment. Do you know that there's a word that was used for the law called the Keduru stones? Okay, sorry, that was used in the ancient times. Has anyone heard of a Keduru stone? So the Keduru stone was what would happen if I was to make a covenant with you in ancient times to, let's say I'm a lord and you're a vassal and I'm giving you a grant of land, so you're getting a plot of land. I would, at the boundaries of your land would be these Keduru stones which would have engraved on them the terms of the covenant. What did they do when they first entered Canaan? When they first crossed the river Jordan near Jericho, what did they do? They set 12 stones engraved with the commandments. They set Keduru stones because they were markers, they were boundaries for right relationships within that territory. It was saying this is not to oppress people in this territory, this is to show the freedom that's going to exist within this territory. So the law is a law of liberty. And then he says, so speak and do as those who will be judged by the law of liberty. Remember, we talked about judge this morning. Judged in a Hebrew concept is not condemned. We're not going to be condemned by the law of liberty. We're going to be vindicated by the law of liberty. Because we're in who? We're in Jesus. We're in Jesus. And so there's freedom in Jesus. So in a Hebrew mindset, let's read it again. So speak and do as those who will be vindicated by the law of liberty. For vindication is without mercy. Judgment. Judgment can include both. Judgment is without mercy for the one who has shown no mercy. Mercy triumphs over judgment. Mercy is what is, and this comes back to where we start the chapter with. Mercy. Where was the law found in the temple? It was found in the Ark of the Covenant. And what sat on top of the law? the mercy seat. It was called the mercy seat. That was where the Shekinah glory would appear in between two cherubim. They were called the cherubim on top of the mercy seat. So you had the Ark of the Covenant. Inside was three things. There was the tablets, the stone tablets. There was a rod of Aaron, the one that was dead and it budded to life. And there was a pot of manna. And that was in the Ark of the Covenant. And the lid for the Ark of the Covenant was known as the mercy seat. It was the throne of God. The Shekinah glory would appear above that. And that's Jesus, the Lord of glory. So we've got this, at the beginning of what he's talking about no partiality, is this fact that Jesus is the Shekinah and he's on top of the mercy seat. If we go to the Shekinah, if we go to the Lord of glory, we see that mercy is above judgment. Mercy is over judgment. And the law right there is given its context in relationship. It's a complete law, it's a complete Jesus, it's a complete God who gives complete gifts. Let's not break them apart. Let's not mangle them and take what God has given us and stretch it. What do we want? We want good, pure religion. We don't want evil religion. I know this was a longer section, but I wanted to get it in because that's what we're doing. So we're going to now start our feast, and then towards the end we'll have our communion as part of the feast. So we will close with prayer and pray for the food that we're going to receive. We've got a nice agape feast today, and we'll do it in this circle where there's no head and there's no foot. So what I'll do is I'll ask Janine, would you like to close for us?
Heavenly Father, we just thank you so much that we could study James 1 and 2 today. And look, just see that we are all equal in your sight and that you are a God of light and love and you love us so much. Lord, as we meet and share our food, we just reflect on you and your love for us. Please be with us and bless us, and we thank you for our food. In your precious name, amen.
Amen.
I just mention something. There's been a fair bit of sickness around, and
Yes.
hand hygiene would be really good. I
Okay.
know most people would do it, but
Yes.
just would hate anyone to.
There are sanitizers. There's sink.
Yeah.
So yes.
Yeah. I'm not saying that anyone wants that.
No, I understand. We don't want any. We haven't lost anyone in our community so far to COVID or anything like that, and we don't want to.
Yeah. But
Okay.
Alina probably would have had COVID on Saturday afternoon as we were driving home. She was coughing in the car
Okay.
and came in sick a couple of days later, so we really don't know
No.
what germs are lurking around.
Do let me know if anyone does get sick and they want access to Dr. Ivermectin and any of the other goodies that I have access to. All right, go and let's set the table up.